January is the month most gardeners waste. While your neighbors are scrolling through seed catalogs and waiting for spring, you could be starting 18 crops that will feed your family months before anyone else's garden even breaks ground. And the difference between planting now versus waiting until March or April isn't just a few weeks of earlier harvest. It's the difference between abundance and scarcity, between food security and dependence on grocery stores that charge $3 for a single tomato. Here are the 18 most productive crops you must plant in January before it's too late. Number 1. Onions. Onions planted from seed in January will be ready to harvest in late summer and will store through the entire winter, giving you a year's supply of one of the most essential cooking ingredients from a single planting. And while most people plant onion sets in spring because it's easier, starting from seed in January produces bigger bulbs that store longer and cost a fraction of the price. Sow onion seeds indoors in seed trays filled with good potting mix. Keep them at around 65 degrees Fahrenheit near a sunny window. And when the seedlings develop their second leaf, about half an inch long, prick them out into another tray, spacing them 2 inches apart. Then harden them off gradually and transplant them outside in early spring as soon as the soil is workable. Number 2. Leeks. Leeks started in January will grow as thick as your arm by fall and will stand in the garden through winter, providing fresh vegetables when almost nothing else is available, which makes them one of the most valuable crops for year-round self-sufficiency. And unlike onions, which need to be harvested and stored, leeks simply wait in the ground until you need them, unaffected by frost and snow.
The process is identical to onions. Sow seeds indoors in trays, keep them warm and moist, prick out when large enough to handle, and transplant outside when the weather permits. But leeks need deeper planting than onions because you're growing them for the long white shaft. So when you transplant them, make a deep hole with a dibber, drop the leek seedling in, and simply water it without filling the hole with soil. These first two crops, onions and leeks, are the foundation of food security because they store for months and you use them in almost every meal, which is why starting them now instead of waiting for spring means the difference between running out in February and having your own supply until next harvest. Number 3. Tomatoes. The last week of January is the perfect time to start tomatoes indoors if you have a greenhouse or sunny window because tomatoes need 8 to 10 weeks of indoor growing before they can be transplanted outside after the last frost, and starting them now means you'll have fruit in early summer instead of waiting until August when everyone else's tomatoes finally ripen. Sow seeds in small pots or seed trays filled with seed starting mix. Keep them at 70 degrees Fahrenheit during the day and 65 at night. Provide as much light as possible, and when the seedlings develop their first true leaves, transplant them into individual 4-inch pots, then gradually harden them off in late spring before moving them to the garden or greenhouse where they'll produce for months. Number 4. Cauliflower. Cauliflower sown in January will be ready to harvest in early summer, filling the gap between spring greens and summer vegetables. And while cauliflower has a reputation for being difficult, the secret is simply starting it at the right time indoors and never letting it stop growing, because any check in its development will cause it to form tiny premature heads instead of the large, dense curds you want. Sow seeds in flats or seed boxes indoors, keep them warm and moist, prick them out into cold frames or under mini greenhouses as they get crowded, and keep sowing more seed every few weeks so you have a continuous supply rather than a glut all at once. Then transplant them outside when they're large enough to handle, spacing them 18 inches apart in rich, well-manured soil.
Number 5. Lettuce. Winter lettuce varieties sown in January in a cold frame or unheated greenhouse will provide fresh salads in early spring when lettuce in stores costs $4 a head. And unlike summer lettuce, which bolts in hot weather, winter varieties are bred to tolerate cold and will grow slowly but steadily through the darkest months, ready to harvest just as your body craves fresh greens after a winter of stored root vegetables. Sow seeds thinly in rows or broadcast them across a bed. Barely cover them with soil because lettuce needs light to germinate. Keep the moisture moist but not waterlogged, and thin the seedlings to about 6 inches apart, or harvest them as baby greens and let the remaining plants fill in the gaps. Number 6. Celery. Celery started in January will be ready for harvest in late summer and fall, and while it's considered a challenging crop, the real secret is simply giving it a long growing season with consistent moisture and rich soil, because celery is essentially a marsh plant that needs more water and fertility than almost any other garden vegetable. Sow seeds indoors in late January, barely covering them because they need light to germinate. Keep them at around 70 degrees and be patient because celery is notoriously slow to germinate, taking up to 3 weeks. Then prick out the seedlings into individual pots when they're large enough to handle, harden them off gradually, and transplant them outside in late spring into trenches filled with compost and manure. And here's why these 6 crops matter more than you think. They represent the difference between buying vegetables all year and growing your own food supply. Because onions, leeks, lettuce, tomatoes, cauliflower, and celery cover your basic needs from spring through winter if you start them now instead of waiting.
Number 7. Peppers. Peppers need an even longer growing season than tomatoes, which is why January is the perfect time to start them indoors, because peppers are slow to germinate, slow to grow, and slow to fruit. But if you give them the time they need, they'll produce abundantly from midsummer until the first frost, providing fresh peppers for salads and cooking, plus enough to dry or freeze for winter use. Sow seeds in small pots or cell trays. Keep them very warm at 75 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit because peppers are tropical plants that won't germinate in cool soil. Provide maximum light once they sprout, transplant into larger pots as they grow, and don't rush to put them outside because peppers are extremely sensitive to cold and will sulk for weeks if exposed to temperatures below 50 degrees. Number 8. Eggplant. Eggplant has the same requirements as peppers, but is even more heat-loving and slow-growing, which means starting it in January gives you the best chance of getting a good harvest before fall frosts arrive. And while eggplant isn't as productive as tomatoes or peppers, a few plants will provide enough fruit for ratatouille, baba ganoush, and grilled vegetables throughout the summer. The process is identical to peppers. Sow in pots, keep very warm, provide maximum light, transplant into larger containers as needed, and wait until the soil is thoroughly warm before transplanting outside. Then mulch heavily and water consistently because eggplant needs steady moisture to produce well. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because the next 4 crops are the ones that separate serious gardeners from hobbyists. These are the crops that tolerate cold, fix their own nitrogen, and produce when nothing else will. Number 9. Broad beans. Broad beans, also called fava beans, are one of the hardiest vegetables you can grow, capable of surviving temperatures down to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, which means in mild climates you can sow them directly outside in January, or in colder areas you can start them in pots in a cold frame and transplant them out in early spring, giving you a crop of fresh beans in late spring or early summer, when nothing else is producing yet. Sow seeds 2 inches deep and 6 inches apart in double rows, or start them in deep pots to avoid disturbing the roots when transplanting, and broad beans fix their own nitrogen from the air through bacteria in their root nodules, which means they actually improve your soil while they grow. And after you harvest the beans, you can cut the plants off at ground level and leave the nitrogen-rich roots in the soil to feed the next crop. Number 10. Peas. Early peas sown in January under cloches or in cold frames will be ready to harvest in late spring, and there's nothing quite like the taste of fresh peas picked straight from the vine. So sweet and tender that they rarely make it from the garden to the kitchen because you eat them all while you're picking them. Sow seeds 2 inches deep and 2 inches apart in double rows, or use the deep bed method and scatter them 6 inches apart across the bed. Provide some kind of support for them to climb, because even dwarf varieties produce better with support. And protect them from mice who love to dig up and eat the seeds by soaking the seeds in kerosene before planting, which doesn't harm the plants, but mice hate the smell. Number 11. Spinach. Spinach is incredibly cold hardy and can be sown outside in January in mild climates, or in cold frames anywhere, and it grows quickly in cool weather, providing fresh greens in early spring when your body desperately needs vitamins after a winter of stored food. And unlike lettuce, which is mostly water, spinach is packed with iron, vitamins, and minerals that make it one of the most nutritious vegetables you can grow. Sow seeds 1/2 inch deep in rows or broadcast across a bed, thin to about 4 inches apart, and harvest by cutting the outer leaves while letting the center continue to grow, or cut the entire plant an inch above the ground, and it will often resprout for a second harvest. Number 12. Kale. Transplants started in January can go outside in early spring and will provide continuous harvests from late spring through the following winter because kale is virtually indestructible, tolerating heat, cold, poor soil, and neglect better than almost any other vegetable,
and it's one of the most nutrient foods on the planet, packed with vitamins A, C, and K, plus calcium and antioxidants. Start seeds indoors in pots or trays, transplant outside when they're 4 to 6 inches tall, space them 18 inches apart, and harvest by cutting the outer leaves while letting the growing tip continue to grow. Or cut the entire plant an inch above the ground and it will often resprout for a second harvest. These 6 crops, from peppers to kale, represent the backbone of a productive garden because they cover the entire growing season from early spring through late fall. And starting them in January means you're not just gardening, you're building a food system that doesn't depend on grocery stores.
Number 13, garlic. If you didn't plant garlic in fall, January is your last chance in mild climates to get cloves in the ground for a summer harvest. And while fall planted garlic produces bigger bulbs, January planting will still give you a decent crop. And growing your own garlic means you'll have fresh bulbs that store for months and cost pennies compared to the $5 per pound that organic garlic sells for in stores. Break apart a bulb into individual cloves, plant them 2 inches deep and 6 inches apart with the pointed end up, mulch heavily with straw or leaves, and let them grow through spring and early summer. Then harvest when the lower leaves turn brown and dry, cure them in a shaded, airy place for a few weeks, and store in a cool, dry location where they'll keep until the following spring. Number 14, shallots. Shallots are planted the same way as garlic, but produce clusters of small onion-like bulbs that have a milder, sweeter flavor perfect for cooking. And they store even better than onions, often keeping for a full year in proper conditions, which makes them an essential crop for self-sufficiency. Plant individual shallot bulbs in January, spacing them 6 inches apart, barely covering them with soil so the tips are still visible, and they'll grow through spring and summer, multiplying into clusters of 6 to 12 bulbs per original bulb planted. Then harvest when the tops die back, cure them like garlic, and store in a cool, dry, dark place. Number 15, rhubarb. January is the perfect time to force rhubarb for an early spring harvest by covering established crowns with barrels or large pots and burying them completely under a pile of manure mixed with straw. And the heat from the decomposing manure combined with the darkness will force the rhubarb to produce tender, sweet stalks weeks before unforced plants, giving you fresh fruit for pies and compotes when nothing else is available. The forced stalks will be pale pink or even white instead of the usual red, and they'll be much more tender and less acidic than regular rhubarb. And while forcing weakens the plant, so you shouldn't do it every year, alternating between plants means you can have forced rhubarb every January without damaging your overall crop. And here's the critical insight most gardeners miss. These last 6 crops, from garlic to asparagus, are the ones that produce for years with minimal work, which means planting them in January isn't just about this year's harvest, it's about building permanent food security.
Number 16, potatoes. January is the time to set seed potatoes to chit, which means placing them in shallow boxes or egg cartons in a light, frost-free location like a shed or greenhouse where they'll develop short, sturdy sprouts before planting. And chitting gives your potatoes a head start of several weeks, resulting in earlier harvests and higher yields, especially important for early varieties that you want to harvest in late spring or early summer. Choose certified disease-free seed potatoes, place them with the end that has the most eyes facing up, keep them in bright light but never in direct sun, and maintain temperatures around 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And in 6 to 8 weeks, they'll have developed strong green or purple sprouts about an inch long, at which point they're ready to plant outside as soon as the soil is workable and frost-free. Number 17, Jerusalem artichokes. Jerusalem artichokes, also called sunchokes, can be planted in January in mild climates, and they're one of the most productive and indestructible crops you can grow, producing massive amounts of edible tubers with almost no care. And they're perennial, meaning once you plant them, they'll come back year after year. And they grow so vigorously that your main challenge will be keeping them from taking over the entire garden. Plant tubers 4 inches deep and 12 inches apart, and they'll grow into towering plants 8 to 10 feet tall with bright yellow sunflower-like blooms in fall. Then, after the first frost kills the tops, you can dig the tubers as needed throughout winter, and they'll store in the ground better than any root cellar, staying fresh and crisp until you're ready to harvest them. Number 18, asparagus. Asparagus is the traditional time to plant asparagus crowns,
And while asparagus requires patience because you can't harvest it for the first 2 years after planting, once established, it will produce for 20 years or more with minimal care, giving you fresh spears every spring for decades. And asparagus sells for $8 to $12 per pound in stores, which means a single asparagus bed can save you hundreds of dollars per year once it reaches full production. Dig a trench 8 inches deep and 12 inches wide, create a ridge of soil mixed with compost down the center of the trench, spread the asparagus crowns over the ridge with the roots draped down the sides, cover with 2 inches of soil, and as the spears grow, gradually fill in the trench over the course of the summer. Then mulch heavily and let the plants grow into tall, ferny foliage that will feed the roots for next year's crop. These 18 crops represent the foundation of a productive garden that will feed you from early spring through the following winter. And the key insight is that January isn't a month for waiting, it's a month for planting, because every week you delay is a week less of growing time. And in gardening, time is the one resource you can never get back.
January is where food security really starts. Not in spring, not when the seed catalogs arrive, but when you plant while everyone else waits. The gardeners who succeed are the ones who understand that the growing season doesn't start in spring, it starts in January. When you're sowing seeds indoors while snow is still on the ground, when you're chitting potatoes in a shed while your neighbors are watching television, when you're forcing rhubarb under manure while everyone else is looking at seed catalogs and dreaming about summer. January is the month that separates the gardeners who talk about self-sufficiency from the gardeners who actually achieve it.